Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Hey, it's our culture unit, so we're going to learn about some culture. And it is a culture I'm not that familiar with. I mean, Tom and I have done programs on the Inuit people, but I've never actually been to an area of the world where they live. It sounds like it's really cold there, and although I love cold weather, it's a little too cold for me. We're describing it as being brutally cold in this area.
There are a couple of problems with living so far north. Yes, indeed, it's cold. And during the winter, of course, the sun does not rise. But an advantage is you probably have a front row seat to watching the Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights.
That's nice.
But we are talking about an indigenous people who live in that part of the world, the Arctic area. Don't confuse them with Eskimos, though. They're not the same thing. A lot of people think they are, but they're not really. I'll try to explain that later if I have time. But in any case, we're talking about a slow tragedy in the Arctic, which, of course, is the region around the North Pole. That would be northern Canada, Greenland, maybe northern Russia there, etc., etc. So let's talk about this. Let's read through our culture unit now from top to bottom one time. The Arctic is not known for its abundance. On the contrary, people often think of it with a shiver, not only because of the brutal cold, but also because of the apparent lack of all forms of life. However, for the indigenous people of the area, including the Inuit, the Arctic has always been a place that provides for them. Despite conflicts with invaders and governmental persecution, Inuit culture has continued to connect people to the land, but climate change now threatens to undo that. For millennia, Inuit have lived and hunted on the ice in regions that are now Greenland, the U.S. state of Alaska, and the northernmost territories and provinces of Canada. But wherever they were, the continuity of their life on that land was disrupted by the arrival of Europeans. In 1950, the Canadian government even forced Inuit to settle in stationary communities as a way to civilize them. This removal from the seasonal cycles of hunting and gathering that had sustained Inuit for generations was devastating. Their traditional knowledge was harder to apply when they were isolated in solitary settlements, but skills like reading the weather remained both viable and valuable. As climate change has become a more urgent problem, and abnormal weather patterns have dominated the news worldwide, even those traditional Inuit methods of reading the weather have become unreliable. In many communities, elders have ceased sharing their wisdom as they feel it has become useless. As more ice melts, the same thing is happening to skills related to navigating it on land and on the sea. Fortunately, some adolescents are still apprenticing with elders, and some indigenous-led councils are doing their best to record as much of the old knowledge as they can. Without a widespread change in the way we face climate change, though, that saved knowledge will never be put to use again.
Okay, guys, let's talk about some culture here of a group that lives in a very cold part of the world. The title of this gives you kind of an insight into where the article is going. It's called A Slow Tragedy in the Arctic. So the Arctic is the area we're going to be talking about primarily. But if you're talking about a tragedy, it's some sort of event that causes a lot of suffering, maybe some destruction. If you're talking about some natural disasters, some distress. But when I say tragedy, it usually involves people dying or coming into some sort of harm. So let's look and see what's happening to the Inuit and why they're calling it a slow tragedy.
And also we're talking about the Arctic, which, as I said before, is the area around the Arctic Ocean or the North Pole. And the Arctic is not known for its abundance. Abundance means having a lot of things. Maybe places like the United States are known for their abundance. They produce lots of agricultural produce, meat, and grains and stuff like that. But the Arctic is far north. They have what is called permafrost there. So it's very difficult to grow plants, and therefore they don't have a lot of food to eat. Maybe they got some animals running around up there that they can slaughter and, hack up and make into steaks and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not really an abundant area.
Right. How do you grow anything up there, right? So it says that it's not known for its abundance, as Tom said. When you have abundance, you have so much of something, you just don't need any more. It seems like you'll never run out of something. I would say Taiwan has an abundance of tasty dishes. I never seem to run out of new dishes to try that are really tasty. So if you have an abundance of something, again, it's just a really large quantity of something. So it says here, it's not known for its abundance in the Arctic. On the contrary, just the opposite. People often think of it with a shiver. If you shiver, you get a cold feeling that goes through your body and you just kind of shake really quickly. That's a shiver. Sometimes you might shiver if you're experiencing something scary. You might start to shiver or shake. Not only because of the brutal cold. Again, it's really cold. So cold that you can't last out very long in that cold without a lot of warm clothing to keep you warmer. But also, it's because of the apparent lack of all forms of life. Tom talked about the permafrost on the ground. It's almost impossible, if not impossible, to grow things.
There are polar bears there. I suppose you could slaughter them and chop them up and make them into steaks and stuff like that. But as far as growing corn or wheat up there, it's probably pretty difficult.
Yeah.
That's what the place is known for not having an abundance of things. However, for the indigenous people of the area, including the Inuit, the Arctic has always been a place that provides for them. So they've figured out a way to survive up there. We've got various indigenous peoples that live in the area. Now, indigenous means they're the original inhabitants, or at least the first inhabitants. We've got lots of different kinds of indigenous people. Here in Taiwan, the various Aboriginal groups, the Taya, the Saisat, the Amis, etc., they're all indigenous people. If you talk about different groups of people, you can add an S to it. You don't have to. We're talking about the indigenous people in general of the area. But if you are talking about specific groups of people, then you can say the peoples of Africa, for example, the various different nations.
Be careful with that, though. I've noticed in Taiwan, though, when we give people permission to put an S on stuff, they forget that it's non-count typically. So be careful with that. So the Arctic has always been a place that provides for them. What is it in the Arctic that allows them to live and thrive, whereas the rest of us who are used to eating corn and potatoes and wheat and things like that would have a hard time? We're going to find out. Despite conflicts with invaders, people who enter your country or even your city or county that are not welcome would be invaders. They usually come with the intention of taking control of an area, and if you have a conflict, you have some sort of fight or battle with them. And they're also experiencing governmental persecution, which isn't hard to believe. Governments will come in and just take over lands of lots of people, especially the indigenous people. We have experienced that in America, too, with some of our Native American tribes. So persecution is when people are treated poorly because of maybe their race, their political views, their religious beliefs. We're going to find out what the government is doing.
We are indeed. And of course, we're continuing to talk about Inuit culture. It has continued to connect people to the land, but climate change now threatens to undo that. Undo is a command on your computer. If you've made a mistake or something, you can just push the undo button and it will reverse what you just did. And that's what that concept is all about. You do something, you realize that you made a mistake or it's not what you wanted to do. So you basically correct it. You just get rid of the stuff you just did and start over again. This can be positive or negative. In this case, though, we're saying that climate change is undoing their connection to the land. They had it before, but some kind of force is taking it away from them.
Now, it says in the next paragraph, for millennia, Inuit have lived and hunted on the ice in regions that are now Greenland, the U.S. state of Alaska, and the northernmost territories and provinces of Canada. I was just looking at the numbers in some of these countries. Canada, by far, has the most. They have 70,000. Greenland, it looks like they have 50,000. Denmark has 16, and the United States, primarily Alaska, has 16,000. So we're not talking about a tribe in the millions. No, it's a small group. But still, they're spread out over these very cold areas because that's part of their culture. We're going to find out how they live in these areas. It says they have lived and hunted on the ice in regions. So Tom kind of hinted at that when he was talking about maybe going hunting after polar bears and hunting them and cutting them up for food. We're going to find out what exactly they do, but we're very aware, of course, that they're in every area of that northern Arctic part of the world.
And it says they have lived and hunted there for millennia. Millennium is the singular. That means 1,000 years. So millennia means thousands of years. So they live there and they've hunted and they've survived in these cold regions and they never felt they had any need to leave. Hey, we like it up here. We're not going to move south where it's warm and hang out on beaches and drink pina coladas and things like that. They were perfectly content to stay up there in those northern regions. But wherever they were, the continuity of their life on that land was disrupted by the arrival of Europeans. Now, continuity refers to when something can continue. And, of course, they were there for thousands of years, and they'd like to remain there for thousands of years more. So that's the continuity of their life, continuing their lifestyle and not having it change or be interrupted. Continuity is also a term we use in film or movies. You want to make sure each scene is logical when it's related to the next scene. Sometimes, for example, if you see a scene where a person is standing and then right away in the next shot, they're actually sitting down. They're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be still standing. That is what we call a break in continuity.
Yeah.
But here, of course, it just refers to their lifestyle continuing without interruption.
Okay, well, we're going to continue after a brief break. We're going to listen to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Hello everyone, 我是派老师。今天讲解的是3月14号 Unit8 A Slow Tragedy in the Arctic。这个单元是文艺选填的练习题，内容跟北极 Inuit 传统生活智慧和气候变迁有关。原本世代相传的气候判读知识，因为气候变迁而失准。文化传承岌岌可危。我们在主体解说前，老师要提醒大家一些答题的要点诀窍，请同学呢先把选项的词性大致上标出来。有一些单字当然不只有一种词性，可是我们根据句子的结构可以判断这一题空格应该要填什么词性，你再去选项里面呢找出正确的来，这样子会比较有效率。好，我们一起来解题吧。请同学看到第一段第一题，请看题干。相反，人们往往一想到北极就空格，不仅是因为酷寒，更因为明显缺乏生机。请注意空格前有不定词那括号 n， 所以呢需要一个名词。我们再用文意筛选，后面提到严寒，土地又缺乏生气。请问这样很容易带给别人什么感觉？应该是冷得发抖吧。所以第一题正确答案是 B shiver。 好，再来请看第二题。题干说，然而对于这个地区的原住民，包括 Inuit， 对他们来说，北极一直是空格什么他们的地方。从文法来看，关系代名词 that 代替前面的地方 place， 是关系子句的主词，而 them 是关系子句的受词。关系子句还需要动词，再用前后文文意筛选，因此第二题正确答案是 J provides for， 意思是供给某某人他们生活所需。这句话意思说，北极一直是供给 Inuit 生活所需的地方。再来，请看第三题。尽管和入侵者发生冲突，又受到政府迫害， Inuit 文化持续把族人和这片土地连接起来。 但气候变迁现在空格这些消除掉。从文法来看，climate change 气候变迁是第三人称单数名词，后面的动词应该要加 s。为什么 undo 是原形动词？可见 undo 并不是主要动词，我们需要找出真正搭配 climate change 的动词，再用前后文文意筛选。因此第三题正确答案是 H threatens to， 这表示某个状况可能有不好的结果。这句话的意思是，但是气候变迁现在可能会截断族人和土地的文化连结。再来，我们看第二段第四题，前面提到几千年来 Inuit 一直在现今的格陵兰、美国阿拉斯加、加拿大最北端的领土和省份上面的冰上生活还有狩猎。接着是题干，不论他们身在何处，他们在那片土地上生活的持续性都欧洲人的到来怎么了？空格前是 be 动词，空格极有可能是过去分词，be 动词加上过去分词就是被动语态啦。那我们再来用文意筛选，第四题答案选 E disrupted。这句话的意思是说，他们不论身处何地，在土地上的生活延续都因为欧洲人到来而中断。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, we're continuing to talk about the Inuit culture. You can say Inuit or Inuit. Both are acceptable, although for the exact correct pronunciation of this word, you probably should go up to northern Canada and ask them yourself. But again, we talked about the fact that they've been there for thousands of years, and the continuity of their life on that land was disrupted or interrupted when the Europeans arrived. So let's go back to 1950. The Canadian government even forced Inuit to settle in stationary communities as a way to civilize them. Now, if something's stationary, it just remains the same and it doesn't go to other places. The Inuit, I guess this implies that the Inuit were nomadic, where they move from place to place depending on the season, depending on hunting conditions and things like that. But in this case, the Canadian government said, nope, you guys got to stay in one place in these communities because we need to civilize you. Obviously, you're not as civil as we Canadians are, or we white people. So yeah, you guys got to stay there and we're going to make you civilized. We're going to have you believe in our religion, speak our language, dress our way, etc.
Yeah, I'm getting a little tired of countries going into other countries and trying to change their lifestyle. They've lived that way for a long time, probably because they're happy that way. But we seem to always stick our noses into other people's business. So that's what it means. By putting those quotation marks around the word civilized, we're kind of making fun of the fact that that's our interpretation or the Western world's interpretation of civilized. Of course, they think their style and way of life is completely civilized. So this removal from the seasonal cycles of hunting and gathering that has sustained the Inuit for generations was devastating. Yeah, when you come in and change someone's lifestyle or take away their ability to either make a living or feed themselves, what you get is a disaster. You get some periods of starvation and people dying from lack of ability to either feed themselves or make a living. So if you talk about sustaining something, it keeps something going. If you want to sustain a new business, you have to keep working hard every day. You can't take a day off and expect your business to keep functioning or keep growing the way you want it to. And if you talk about something that was devastating or that is devastating, it's very destructive. It hurts a lot of people. It's damaging. You could say that typhoons here in Taiwan are sometimes very devastating to the communities and to the country as a whole.
Exactly. So again, they've got these cycles of hunting and gathering, and that had sustained them for millions of years. Well, not millions, thousands of years. And of course, that disruption of their life cycle was devastating, which which destroyed their lifestyle. Their traditional knowledge was harder to apply when they were isolated in solitary settlements. But skills like reading the weather remained both viable and valuable. So, of course, they had traditional knowledge about the environment, but if they're suddenly asked to stay in one place and set up little towns with streets and cars to drive around in and restaurants to go to and things like that, well, then you don't really need those traditions. Their traditional knowledge was harder to apply to such situations. These are solitary settlements. If something's solitary, it's isolated from other places, so they kind of just have to stay in one place. And northern Canada is quite huge, as is Greenland and Alaska. So if you have one town in one place, then the next town may be several hundred miles away.
Yeah, we also use solitary to talk about guys or women that are in prison. If they're really bad, or maybe the prison is afraid that other prisoners will kill them or hurt them, they'll put them in solitary confinement, or he's in solitary. Sometimes you'll hear that on the news. Solitary, or all alone. Here it's an adjective, solitary. Now, moving on to the final paragraph, it says, as climate change has become a more urgent problem and abnormal weather patterns have dominated the news worldwide, even those traditional Inuit methods of reading the weather have become unreliable. Now, look there in the sentence, we have a vocabulary word, abnormal, which just means it's not what's normal or usual. Something else is going on. So it's behaving or happening in a way that's worrying or atypical, something that is not something you'd expect. So, abnormal. Sometimes if you go see a doctor and they see something kind of bad in an x-ray, or maybe in your blood tests that come back, they'll say, yeah, we're seeing something abnormal in your test results. We should check on that further. So abnormal is something that usually gets you worrying a little bit about whatever you're talking about. It's not what you're used to. And people always hate change, or something that's moving away from normality, I guess you could say.
And you've heard the news about abnormal weather patterns all over the world, droughts in the American West and floods in Nigeria. And here in Taiwan, of course, for some reason, we haven't had a good typhoon in a very, very long time. Taiwan, of course, depends on typhoons to fill up its reservoirs from time to time. So, yes, indeed, this abnormal weather, or these abnormal weather patterns, have become news all over the world, and so those traditional methods the Inuit have for reading the weather have become unreliable. They just don't quite know how to do it, to look at the clouds or feel the barometric pressure and be able to make weather forecasts in their own traditional way. And in many communities, elders have ceased sharing their wisdom as they feel it has become useless.
Oh.
Too bad there. The elders feel that their knowledge or information is no longer useful. So they're thinking, why bother tell the younger generation? They won't want to listen to it anyway. And even if they do listen, it's no longer usable because things have changed too much.
You know, life is changing for a lot of people. You know, I think of the farmers where their younger kids have moved away to go work in the city. And so all of their wisdom is kind of going to waste. It's hard to see, but, you know, life changes and we have to kind of adapt to it. So as more ice melts, the same thing's happening to skills related to navigating it on land and on the sea. If you navigate something, you're just kind of traveling from one place to another. Your navigation system in your car would tell you if you're going north, south, east, west, something like that. Sailors will navigate the sea, and also you can navigate if you're flying an airplane, too, if you have to navigate that way. So fortunately, it says some adolescents are kind of the teenage years we're talking about. They're still apprenticing with elders. If you are an apprentice, and here we're using it as a verb to apprentice with someone, you're like their assistant. This is what we used to do long ago. You would go and work with a painter or a carpenter, and you would learn that trade, those skills, with somebody who is already very good at it. And then you would take off and start earning money on your own. Some of these adolescents are still staying with the elders, and they're picking up some of the wisdom the elders have gained over the years.
Absolutely, and here the final sentence says, without a widespread change in the way we face climate change, though, that saved knowledge will never be put to use again. So this is telling us that we need to face climate change and we need to make adjustments. And if we don't do that, then this knowledge will not be used again because the world of the future will be different and that old knowledge will not be applicable to current situations, although I'm confident it could be modified to meet different changes in climate, which inevitably will happen when, ice ages come and go and stuff like that. Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
紧接着是第5题，前一句提到1950年，加拿大政府甚至强迫 Inuit这一群人呢，必须要在固定社区定居，以此来教化他们。接着请看题干，这句子稍微复杂了点，里面呢有个关系子句，从 that 开始，一直到 generations 结束。先行词是前面 seasonal cycles of hunting and gathering。关系子句的意思是，狩猎采集的季节循环让 Inuit 族人世代生生不息，部落得以世世代代绵延不绝是好事。怎么会加上 devastating 呢？可见这个关系子句并不是真正的主词，主词另有其人。这件事带来很不好的结果，我们需要在指示代名词 this 之后找个名词。第5题选 C removal。This removal 代表的是加拿大政府强迫 Inuit 人定居，脱离传统谋生形态的季节循环。再来，我们看第6题，前一句，当他们被孤立于单一的定居点时，更加难以运用传统知识，但判读天气等技能仍然空格而且宝贵。Remain 这个动词用法和 be 动词一样，后面要有主词补语，表示仍然怎么样。后面已经有一个 valuable 宝贵的形容词作为主词补语，后面这个 and 是对等连接词，前后连接的词性要对等。所以第6题要找形容词，因此第6题选 I viable 可行的。接着请看第7题，随着气候变迁成为一项更加空格怎么样的问题，异常的天气模式已经占据了全球新闻版面，即使 Inuit 传统的判读天气方法也已经变得不可靠。more 之后名词 problem 之前，我们需要形容词形成比较级，再用文意筛选，所以第7题答案选 D urgent 紧急急迫的。接着请看第8题，在许多社区，长者已经空格分享他们的智慧，因为他们觉得老祖宗判读天气的方法变得毫无用处。主词 elders 长者之后需要动词，而 have 是助动词 have PP 现在完成式，再用文意筛选，所以第8题答案选 F cease 停止，表示长者不再传授祖先的智慧。接着请看第9题，幸运的是一些青少年仍然跟着长者当学徒，还有一些原住民领导的委员会在尽最大努力空格尽可能多的古老知识。不定词 to 之后需要原形动词，因此第9题答案选 G record 记录。最后第10题，但是如果我们空格气候变迁的方式没有发生广泛变化，那么保存下来的知识将再次永无用武之地。The way 是关系副词子句，后面要加完整的子句。We 是主词 ，climate change 受词，这个句子需要动词，所以第10题选 A face 面对。以上就是我们针对文意选填所做的解题，谢谢大家。
That's it, guys. It's just a one-day unit. We hope you enjoyed learning more about the Inuit culture, and we hope you'll join us for our next program. For English Digest, I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom. Goodbye.
Bye.